The terminal buzzed with chatter, rolling luggage, and the usual announcements echoing across the airport. Gate 34 was boarding passengers for Flight 792 to Atlanta. Among the boarding crowd was Michael, a calm, soft-spoken black man in his early 30s, dressed neatly in a tailored suit. He had just returned from a humanitarian conference overseas, where he was recognized for his leadership in disaster relief across Africa and Southeast Asia. Michael wasn't the type to draw attention to himself, but when he stepped onto the aircraft, a quiet storm was about to form around him. He checked his boarding pass, seat 4A, business class window seat. He smiled faintly, grateful for a quiet flight ahead. At the same time, a sharply dressed white woman in her 50s boarded behind him, dragging a designer handbag and radiating the kind of energy that made flight attendants instinctively brace themselves. Her name was Margaret. As fate would have it, she was assigned the aisle seat 4B right next to Michael. Margaret took one look at Michael and instantly froze. Her eyes narrowed. A brief scan of his features, his skin. His presence in that particular seat seemed to offend her. She paused just long enough for a nearby passenger to notice. "Excuse me," she said sharply, pointing toward the seat. "I think there's been a mistake. This seat should be next to someone else." Michael turned toward her, puzzled but polite. "This is seat 4A, he said, showing his ticket. "I believe you're in 4B. Margaret frowned, still not moving. "There's no way this is correct," she muttered. Then with a look of disbelief, she said it, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "I don't feel comfortable sitting next to him. Isn't there another seat available?" Her voice carried a tone that made heads turn. The cabin, moments ago a quiet procession of boarding travelers, suddenly grew still. The nearest flight attendant, Sarah, a composed woman with years of experience, approached to address the situation. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, already sensing the familiar signs of an escalating issue. Margaret didn't hold back. "I don't want to sit next to this man. Can you please move me to another seat? I paid for business class." Her tone was firm, entitled. Michael remained seated, calm, trying not to make eye contact. He had been through this before, in elevators, in meetings, in stores, but somehow, it never got easier. The surrounding passengers were now fully aware. A young woman seated across the aisle pulled out her phone. Just in case this became something worth recording, Sarah's professional demeanor held, but the air had shifted. She nodded. "Let me see what we can do." But her eyes darted quickly between the two seats, assessing far more than logistics. Sarah walked to the front of the cabin to speak with the head purser and check the manifest. There were a few open seats in economy, but business class was booked solid, at least on paper. Meanwhile, Margaret had chosen to stand in the aisle rather than sit next to Michael. Arms crossed, face tight with visible disgust. Several passengers whispered to each other, some appalled, others afraid to speak up. Michael, however, remained still, looking out the window. Inside, he wasn't angry, just tired of moments like this. He had traveled to more countries than most people would in a lifetime. Had met world leaders, helped rebuild villages, but here he was, reduced to someone unworthy of a seat by a stranger's prejudice. When Sarah returned, her tone was different, calm but resolute. "Thank you for your patience," she said to both. "We do have a seat we can offer. Let me show you." Everyone assumed Sarah would offer Michael a different seat, moving him to avoid further conflict. But what happened next sent a ripple through the cabin. "Mr. Thomas," she said to Michael, "would you mind gathering your things? We'd like to offer you an upgrade to first class. Compliments of the airline." The pause was deafening. Margaret's expression twisted in confusion and disbelief. "Wait, he's being moved to first class?" she asked, incredulous. Sarah turned to her, voice unwavering. "Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, we don't have any other seats available in business class. But since you expressed discomfort, we're happy to let you remain in your assigned seat alone." A soft wave of murmured approval spread among the passengers. Michael stood, nodded respectfully, and followed Sarah toward the front. Cameras recorded quietly. Margaret was left standing alone, her face a mix of embarrassment and rage. As Michael settled into his first class, seat 3A, another flight attendant offered him a drink and a sincere apology. Meanwhile, in business class, the passengers began exchanging glances and quiet commentary. A man in 4D leaned over and whispered to Margaret, "I guess kindness goes a long way." She said nothing. Others nodded in agreement. Social media posts were already going up. Tweets like Flight 792, Flight Attendant just handled racism with absolute class. Back in first class, Michael finally relaxed, sipping water, grateful not just for the seat but for the dignity preserved. The crew had done more than follow policy. They had taken a stand, and passengers noticed. One even said to the crew, "That's the kind of story people need to hear right now." The flight hadn't even taken off, and it was already trending. Midway through the flight, Sarah checked on Michael again. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Thank you for how you handled that," he replied. She smiled. "You didn't deserve that kind of treatment." "No one does." In business class, Margaret sat stiffly, arms folded. No one made conversation with her. Isolation had taken its seat beside her. At cruising altitude, silence had replaced confrontation. And somewhere over Tennessee, something deeper was happening. A quiet reflection among passengers. The lesson was unspoken but powerful. Dignity isn't something that comes with a seat number. It's how you treat others that determines your altitude. As the wheels touched down in Atlanta, there was no mistaking the mood. When the flight attendant thanked everyone over the intercom, a passenger clapped, then another, and soon the cabin joined in a small but clear applause. Not for the landing, but for the way something wrong had been made right. Margaret exited the aircraft with her sunglasses on, avoiding eye contact. Michael, meanwhile, was greeted by a young boy and his mother at the gate, supporters from the foundation he worked with. One of the passengers from business class walked up to him. "You handled that with more grace than most could," she said. "Thank you," he nodded. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. A nearby journalist who had been on board knew she had a story to write. By the next morning, a video clip of the incident had gone viral. The headline read, "Passenger demands, Black man be moved, flight crew responds with dignity." Comments flooded in. People shared similar stories. Airlines commended the crew for their professionalism. Michael's identity, once anonymous to many, became known. People discovered his humanitarian work, his quiet strength, his leadership. Margaret, on the other hand, chose to remain silent. No statements, no apologies. But the message was already clear. The world was watching, and for once it applauded not outrage but integrity. Michael wasn't a victim. He was a reminder of how to rise with dignity. There are moments in life where you are called not to react, but to rise. Michael didn't argue. He didn't plead or protest. He simply allowed others to reveal who they truly were. And when the airline responded not with silence but with action, they set an example for everyone watching. In a time where the world often feels divided, stories like these show us something powerful. Respect has no color. Decency has no class. And courage doesn't always come with a megaphone. Sometimes it sits quietly in seat 4A. So next time you see injustice, remember your voice, your choice, and your dignity matter more than you think, because sometimes one person standing firm is all it takes to bring an entire plane full of people to their feet.